30th of October, and what a day to end the month of October. Of course, taking us effectively from tomorrow and weekend by Sunday into the month of November. And of course, we're getting closer to the big US elections on November the 3rd. But on the African continent, tomorrow, Saturday, is a big one in Ivory Coast, where President Alassane Ouattara is standing up for re-election, while votes are still being counted in Tanzania. Welcome, my guest on today's show, Aly-Khan, the CEO at Rich Frontiers Management. Thank you so much, Ali, and good morning to you in Nairobi.
It's a pleasure and always a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Quite a whole bit of what the CMA in Kenya has been talking about, and I'm sure we would like to get your insight into the privatization of SOEs, the whole Sukuk, Islamic Finance Fund. It looks like the CMA is coming fast and furious, as it were, in trying to deepen the Kenyan equities market space. We're interested in that story. Even though your neighbors in Rwanda today, they are doing another rights issue listing as we speak. It's going to be the third activity on the Rwanda Stock Exchange this year. But let's check through the Nigerian, check through the West African market and Pan-African very quickly. Yesterday, Nigerian market was off on a public holiday. That was Wednesday's figure that you saw there. Then, of course, you get a bit of a sense of the rest of the continent. For Nigeria, the whole issue was around the WTO Director General, whatever. But Ivorian market 0.95%, Egyptian market 0.42% down. Kenya was down about 0.17%, and South Africa 0.79%. This morning, South Africa is opening still on a negative territory, and the rand around 1642 about an hour ago. A bit of a beating South Africa is taking because of its correlation with the emerging markets. East Africa is what I was talking about earlier with the CMA, who now wants the state-owned entities to be privatized, listed on the exchange. And it's just about a month or so ago that the authorities approved EGM Securities to be an FX trading non-bank FX broker. Now the company's issued a cautionary notice on suspected fraudsters. Today, we're expecting the Absa Kenya's Sustainability Commitment Report. Whose name is going to be on that is anyone's guess. PepsiCo is looking at more investment in Ethiopia. That's a good one. And the NIRSAL Stock Exchange posted a revenue of 2.3 billion shillings in the third quarter. Ali, let's start with your home front, Kenya, with the CMA. What's the CMA authority? What are they driving at?
So, the Capital Markets Authority has become a little bit more activist of late. It's been quite noticeable in that development. Obviously, we've had a tough time with the stock exchange. The NSE 20 is back to levels we haven't seen for 15 or more years. And the Capital Markets Authority is pressing the government to get back on board with the Kibaki divestment program, which saw the likes of shares in KenGen and Safaricom sold with much fanfare at the Nairobi Securities Exchange. And basically, they're pressing the government and saying, look, why don't you bring more issuance to the stock exchange? Obviously, it's been a depressed environment for many of the state-owned enterprises, and therefore valuations will be depressed. But, my view on that is if you're going to sell off stakes in state-owned enterprises, sell them cheap, for goodness sake, because you have a dual mission. The one mission is to increase ownership in your society, and why not allow people who are coming into the stock exchange to have a profit? So it is not a bad idea to sell stock cheap. It doesn't necessarily make sense to sell it expensive. So that's one of the ideas. And I saw this happen under Mrs. Thatcher. I saw this happen under President Kibaki here in Kenya, and it was one of the most exciting things that can happen in an economy, particularly one where people do not have huge ownership stakes, and therefore you actually increase ownership, the sense of ownership in a country, and it has a very, very powerful effect in my view. So I think the CMA are right to be pushing at this door. They're also talking about Islamic finance and a sukuk bond. We've been talking about this for eternity. And the question is there going to be as much liquidity out of these markets, given what we're watching in the oil market in particular, which yesterday fell very sharply to lows not seen since May. But I think, you know, this is another pool of liquidity that the Kenyan government could be tapping, and I think it would be wise to do so. EGM Securities, which is a broker that allows investors to trade on the foreign exchange markets and other markets globally, issued a cautionary notice on suspected fraudsters. You know, we've spoken about this a lot. In the current environment, there's a lot of fraud going on, whether it's in cryptocurrency schemes. A lot of our regulators had been warning on this front on a continuous basis throughout the year. Absa's sustainability commitment report, we touched on that a couple of sessions ago. This is where we've dropped, Kenya's dropped a little bit in that ranking, but it shows this growing awareness around sustainability in the African corporate sector, which is obviously, in my view, a positive thing. PepsiCo eyeing an investment in Ethiopia. That's a positive step, given, you know, the degree of volatility we've seen in the Ethiopian economy, not least around the regional entities who seem to be, you know, less enthused with Prime Minister Abiy's strategy. So that's a vote of confidence. Dar es Salaam, obviously, it's been in the news considerably. I'll get to the stock exchange, but let me touch on Tanzania. According to the latest polls that have been published, the president's party is at 80%. The opposition is at 15%. There are a lot of issues with this. Bear in mind, at the last election, the CCM got about 56% of the vote. So this is an increase of 24 percentage points. It's eye-catching, and a lot of people are highly skeptical. I saw tweets from the US Embassy, from the UK Embassy around the whole process. And obviously, it's become even more stressed in places like Zanzibar, where Mr. Mwinyi, who represents the ruling party, had as much as 76% of the vote. This is not possible if you understand the dynamics of the Zanzibari politics. They've always supported their own candidate. Last time round, it was admitted there was fraud, and then there was a reconciliation. So we have a very stressful situation in Tanzania. The question will be the level that the opposition will go to the street, I think. So far, Lissu, the opposition candidate, has said that he rejects the result entirely. But, you know, ultimately, as we know in Africa, you can be the opposition and you can reject it, but it's meaningless. So you've got to take it to a different level, frankly, if you are going to object substantively, and that's going to be the question. Tanzanian stock market, that's a pretty good number, frankly. Revenue up 2.3 billion, and profit after tax up as well. Pretty impressive, but it's thinly traded in Tanzania. Although they're now making that move to integrate Tanzania, Rwanda, and other East African stock markets, which was seen as a geo-economic move, with Kenya caught in the crossfire.
I think the elections and whatever is associated with it is also being watched keenly here in West Africa, with the Ivorian elections tomorrow, Saturday. Is the biggest francophone speaking country in West Africa, one of the largest on the continent, by the way. So that's also been keenly watched, I'm sure by everyone. Let's look at the West African Nigerian markets with all the talk around who becomes the next WTO Director General. Absa yesterday issued a statement that the new U.S. presidency must yield to collective will of the nations when it comes to the choosing of the next head of the WTO. Nigeria's president talked about nearly 60 billion naira fund for the youth entrepreneurship that the central bank yesterday announced. The framework for that, the initial takeoff will be 12.5 billion naira. NIRSAL Microfinance Bank, which is backed by the Bankers Committee and the Central Bank and Nigeria's Postal Service, will midwife the distribution of these funds to youths that qualify and all that. But the big news, which I'm sure Ali is also watching very keenly from Kenya, is the Brent crude price sharply below $40 a barrel, and what that means for oil producing countries. Yesterday, ExxonMobil in the US announced the cutting of jobs globally speaking. Thousands on the US soil alone, it will be close to 2,000 jobs that will go. Nigeria's big oil company Seplat releasing its third quarter numbers this morning. In Senegal, the WIC capital is pumping 128 million CFA franc into Clovia Saraya SAS. Reporting season for the markets across the world. So that is BRVM net income up 52% to 2 billion CFA franc in the period. Within the UMOA region, Mali, north of Nigeria's border, raised a new loan of 27.5 CFA franc to support the government. Ali, just your thoughts on oil prices right now. What we saw yesterday was that Libya is doing about 680,000 now barrels per day. Now Brent crude is below 40, and it looks like sentiment is not going anywhere stronger anytime soon.
So currently, looking at the screen, we're at $38.30 on Brent crude. And it's been hit again by a perfect storm, no different to the storm that hit it earlier in the year when we had that extraordinary situation where NYMEX traded at negative rates. Now, what's happening in the oil market is in part a demand problem. So let's start with that. COVID cases topped 500,000 for the first time ever. And if you look at the trend line, that's going higher. You've got Europe now going back into lockdown. You've got the US just shy of 100,000 cases a day. And what it's telling us is that we're back to that hard stop scenario in our economies where people are basically, although the lockdown theory has lost some of its luster, if you are getting numbers like we're getting right now, you're going to have to do something. So from a demand side, we've got very, very weak demand. We've got this virulent virus, which is going to lock down demand some more. We've got a scenario where Libya, as you said, is probably headed to 1 million barrels per day. So that's extra supply coming on board. And frankly, we've got very weak economies globally, particularly the oil producers. And if you want to discipline supply, it's very difficult in such an environment to go around and tell people, no, don't produce, reduce it. They all need the cash, and cash is king. So it's not easy. You can imagine in Luanda to be telling them to cut back, or in Lagos and Abuja, or wherever you care to mention. And then a very interesting story I saw, Boason, Zoom video, and we're on Zoom right now, is worth more than ExxonMobil. And I think, to me, that sums up the problem, right? I mean, this whole COVID scenario has accelerated digitization. And you see in that comparison that something like Zoom is worth more than Exxon sums it all up. So look,
years ago, nobody. If you wager that 10 years ago, you're going to lose.
Yeah, that's right. It's amazing, isn't it? And so look, I'm very concerned, and I think for oil-producing countries, this is a moment of maximum peril. And if you look at the COVID trend line, it's not tapering off. If anything, it's about to surge even further.
I think South African market has an interesting story for us this morning. I'm sure you already saw that with MTN selling off his stake in Jumia for about 2.5 billion 2.3 billion rand. That's about 142.3 million US dollars. That's a very big story. Old Mutual is planning to expand in China. It looks like Old Mutual, looking at China-Africa relations, decided to go to Beijing and expand its frontiers, looking at what will happen moving forward. Very typical and very aggressive move there by Old Mutual, very tactical as it were. Central banks were selling gold fast and furious in third quarter, 12.1 tons of the bullion, for the first of such major selling in 10 years. Standard Bank wants to rejig its management. That's according to a notice issued yesterday by this South Africa SA-based big lender on the continent and planning new business units as early as 2021. Zambia inflation, food prices up 16% in October. Well, that's a very sticky point there, isn't it, Ali?
Yeah, absolutely. And you got some great stories there. Let me just start in the sequence that you read them. Jumia, of course, was the big e-commerce hope for sub-Saharan Africa. MTN was the anchor shareholder in that business. They've got some other great shareholders. It started off with Rocket Internet, then MTN, then I think likes of MasterCard are in there. Plenty of people invested in it. You had this IPO, which saw the price surge. Then they got hit by Viceroy Research, who had issues with accounting, particularly in your home market of Nigeria, and the price got crushed. And then, of course, 2020 happened, and we saw this phenomenal outsized move into digitization and e-commerce. The price recovered from the lows, and I think MTN have decided to book their gains. They were an early investor. They probably feel that they are still a partner, but they've taken some money off the table. So from MTN's point of view, a good piece of business. Didn't sell it at the peak, but who does? But they got out for a good profit. So that's an interesting e-commerce story from the continent. Going back to Standard Bank rejigging management, Standard Bank won an accolade recently of being the most credible bank across the continent. It'll be interesting to see what developments. They are in all our markets. They're here in Kenya, a tier one bank in your home market as well, and very sophisticated operators. That Old Mutual story is very interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's interesting that the South African companies have been knocking at the Chinese door for a long time. China, for example, was an investor in Standard Bank. So I think they're utilizing the political geoeconomic dynamic between the two countries and the relationship. And, by all means, China is an enormous market opportunity for somebody like Old Mutual. And I think that, that should see the share price firm up a little bit, given, the size of the market opportunity. Central banks sold gold, 12.1 tons in Q3, which probably brought us from that high above 2,000 down here. And I think that speaks to probably more emerging market central bank selling, because if you look at the currency pressure a lot of these guys had, I can imagine President Erdogan was a big seller. I'd like to look into that, given what's happened with the Turkish lira, but probably a number of other central banks were also joining that trend. Zambia, that's very high, isn't it? CPI of 16% in October. I mean, if you look around the continent, CPI has actually been quite benign. Zambia is has a big agricultural economy, so I'm surprised that food prices have run away. That must be weather related, I'm sure. And of course, they recently announced that they've reached a deal with some of their Chinese commercial lenders, and that should give some respite. But food in the current environment, you've got to keep an eye on food prices, because we all know about bread riots all over the world and all during history.
Okay, let's do a final technically this morning on North Africa, and of course the earnings season there's no let up. Of course, some of these are coming through, but I'm sure you're interested in the Sudan story, raising fuel prices to cut budget deficit. This is one economy that is well, I won't say both knees on the ground, but at least perhaps one knee on the ground, the other up, trying to find its way around the virus, the whole issues around drought and what have you. Tunisia is reporting listed companies posting 31.2% loss in the first half of the year, where that is expected, considering the virus lockdown and what have you. Who goes to the stock market, by the way, during that period in Tunisia, considering that some of the listed companies, of course, will post very deep losses within the period. Egyptian foreigners sold a record 13.5 billion in 10 months. That's a big one. Egypt is where foreigners looking to make money. Ali.
So let me start with your Sudan headline. I mean, Sudan, I was looking at the per capita income, was a very rich country. I mean, it peaked at $3,900, and it's absolutely collapsed. So the situation in Sudan, which went through this really exciting revolution where you had women and children leading the charge, you had this new Prime Minister Hamdok come into power, you've had the reconciliation with Israel, which played well to the Trump gallery. But essentially the problem is big and they've got to deal with it. And, you know, one would have hoped for some more follow through, particularly from the US and others, to support this new political dispensation in Khartoum, which has promised so much. But, you know, they've got this very, very difficult problem, and cutting fuel prices at this time when your people are genuinely suffering it never works. You remember when President Goodluck tried to cut fuel prices in Lagos, and what happened, right? So the same, you're looking at a volatile scenario, and you know, I really hope that the international community backs Hamdok's government with a little bit more substance than they've had so far. Libya daily oil production at 680,000 barrels. Remember, that was at zero a few weeks ago, and it looks like it's headed to 1 million in pretty short time. And Libyan oil is the favorite oil for the Europeans. There's a lot of demand for this oil, and it's probably displacing other people's oil, given that, you know, we're in an environment where there's too much supply chasing too little demand. Foreigners sold a record 13.5 billion in 10 months. I think that's in the stock market, which primarily they've been selling stocks, they've been buying local T-bills. So, you know, it'll be interesting to compare that. So I think it's an asset allocation trade that's been going on in Egypt. But net, Egypt's up on foreign investment as far as I can see. Tunisia listed companies posted 31.2% loss in the first half. That's about par for the course at the moment. So no big surprises there, I think.
Yes. But of course, Egypt is a good field of play for foreign investors as we speak. So with the currency situation, they can get into equities and get out and go into treasury, go into bonds and what have you. I think they've pretty opened up the financial services space and the various asset classes so that it makes it very, very fluid, and investments are pouring in. The last news we got was that U.S. investment in Egypt within the last 1 year is about $20 billion. That's quite massive. That's the biggest on the continent. It's on Twitter, and this is verified. It's just amazing. $20 billion. That's a big one. Thank you so much, Ali. Very great conversation with you this Friday, and it's good to end the month of October with you. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. See you on Monday, and goodbye from Lagos.